Of all the stories in the Bible, the Israelite Exodus from Egypt is among the most critical to the overall narrative of salvation history, if not the most entertaining. Filled with intrigue, powerful revelations about God, the foundation of a covenantal relationship that will forever bind God with Israel. The story is a literary masterpiece of faith. And yet, for many people, there is but one question that matters. Did the Exodus really happen? While an interesting question for sure, and scholars certainly have put forward a variety of possible answers, there's truly only one appropriate response to this question. What do you mean by the Exodus? This is Catholicism in Focus. Whether you've seen the story play out on the silver screen or heard it read in Sunday school, there's probably no one in the Western world who is not familiar with the extraordinary events of the Exodus story. Scenes like the 10 plagues and the crossing of the Red Sea are not just religious stories. They've entered into the collective imagination of our world.
Everything you need to know is written on these pizza boxes. Number 1.
Let my people go.
Put down Moses.
It's no wonder then, when a story that is so central to the faith of two religions is filled with such otherworldly events, that many, both religious and not, would want to know if there's any historical basis to it. So let's look at the evidence. From a strictly biblical perspective, there isn't a whole lot of historical material to work with, as neither pharaoh is named, few Egyptian words are used, and the cities mentioned have no historical records of their own. So that's not much help. What's worse is that the details we do have are a bit far-fetched. Beyond the plagues and miracles themselves, there's definitely a problem with numbers. In Exodus 12, we read that the Israelites all leave together in the night towards the wilderness after being freed from the Pharaoh's control. Verse 37 claims that the total that escaped numbered 600,000 men, not including women, children, or livestock. We're talking at least a couple million people here. To put that number in perspective, the entire kingdom of Egypt, which at the time would have been the largest in the world, was estimated to have only about 2.8 million in population. That number of people altogether is just unfathomable. If the entire crowd walked in rows of 10, they would form a line over 150 miles in length, and it would take them 8 or 9 days just to cross a single point. To think that a people almost the size of the host nation could leave in one night and there be no historical record of it casts some doubt on the historicity of the story. Again, this is without even considering the extraordinary plagues and miracles themselves. As it's written, it's difficult to accept a literal reading of the text. It's for this reason that there is no shortage of people, including people of faith, who want to argue that the story of the Exodus is nothing more than a mythological explanation of a people's origin. Given the miracles, given the unlikely nature of the historical events, many see the story as nothing more than a way to remind the people of Israel that God loves his people, that they are saved from harm, and that they are bound to a covenant of morality. In asking whether or not the Exodus really happened, the answer for them is an unequivocal no. And that makes a lot of sense. The Bible itself is not a history book concerned with facts and dates, but a theological book concerned with truth and relationships. To suggest that the Exodus story is purely mythological is not to say that it's not true. Myths are by their very nature true. And what this one reminds us is that God does love his people, that they are saved, and that they are bound to a covenant. And yet, what good is a story about how God loves his people, saves them, and binds them in a covenant if none of that ever actually happened? We can call the creation stories myths without challenging our faith, because we know that even if God didn't create in the exact way that it's told in Genesis and Job, God did in fact create. Something actually happened. If we try to suggest that the Exodus story is purely mythological, that it has no basis in history, that God didn't actually do these things, well, then the story bears no truth at all. Luckily, this is not the case, as there's plenty of evidence to show that something did happen. Archaeological evidence doesn't give the impression that millions of people all left a country at once, but it does show that hundreds of new settlements were formed in the land around Israel in the 13th or 12th centuries BCE. These were formed by nomadic people all at once, roughly the same time that the Exodus is believed to have happened. Similarly, the description of the harsh labor experienced by the Israelites in the Bible matches the historical record of what would have been experienced by the Asiatics, slaves of the Egyptian Empire that made bricks and lived in the Delta area. Add these two details to the fact the biblical account offers a generally accurate knowledge of the geography, weather phenomena, and politics of Egypt and the desert regions, and there is certainly evidence to suggest that while largely peppered with mythological language, the core of the Exodus story reflects a real historical event. There was an oppressed people who experienced their freedom from bondage as the work of God. Maybe the Israelites were much smaller in number than indicated. Maybe they left in waves rather than all at once. Maybe there were multiple individual events experienced by different peoples that came to be understood as the same event. Scholars have proposed theories as to how it happened, but many agree that something happened. Which leads us back to our original question. What do we mean by the Exodus? If by the Exodus we mean that millions of Israelites left Egypt all at once, were pursued by the Egyptian army before crossing the Red Sea, then no, we can say pretty definitively that that didn't happen. But if by the Exodus we mean that God heard the cries of his people, that his love and demand for justice led him somehow to actively engage with their oppressors, freeing them from bondage and making them his special people, then yes, it is a distinct possibility that it did happen. Which is really important. Just as a purely literalist reading of the text in which we accept everything at face value is a bit ridiculous, so too is a purely mythological reading of the text in which the only thing that matters is the message, not the facts. Both are completely illogical. In order for there to be truth, there must also be action. The Exodus story does not simply remind us that God loves us in a general sense, that we are called to be in relationship. It points to the very fact that God did love us in history and created an actual covenant with us.